And welcome to another edition of our treatment of the International Sunday School lesson. Today's lesson is for October the 28th, 2018, Fall Quarter, Lesson number 9. The title of today's lesson is The Marriage of Isaac. And it's taken from Genesis, the 24th chapter, verses 12 through 21, and then jumping down to verses 61 through 67. Now, a little background information on today's lesson. This is after the death of Isaac's mother, Sarah, and he is a grown man now. He is about 40 years old. He still hasn't married, but he has begun to accumulate a little bit of wealth and standing in the community, and it's time for him to get married. So his father Abraham sends his servant to go seek out a wife for his son Isaac. Now, notice how that within the context of different cultures and different customs, people can still live godly lives and have a deep, meaningful relationship with God, and that it's not tied to the particular cultural customs of the day. Because we see here where Abraham is doing an arranged marriage for his son Isaac, which is within the context of righteousness and is going along and is perfectly legitimate. The same way that in our culture, here in the United States, and in most of the world now, there are not arranged marriages. We have a system where kids begin to date and they pick out their own mates and that kind of thing. And that is also something that you can very legitimately live a righteous life and make and God can lead you to the right spouse and that kind of thing within that context. So we should be real careful that we don't try to force an inclination to our own culture on top of Christianity. I think one of the, and this is going off on a side tangent, but I think one of the most common things that happens is when people do that with music. They assume that if a particular type of music is within their cultural liking of their time, that music is more righteous than any other type of music. And that's just not the case. Okay. But anyhow, getting back to our Sunday school lesson, the servant had went out to seek a mate for Isaac because it was time for him to be married. And that's where we take up our lesson. Okay, Genesis 24, verses 12 through 14. And he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham. This is, of course, the servant. I pray thee, send me good speed this day, and shew kindness unto my master Abraham. Behold, I stand here by the well of water, and the daughters of the men of the city come out to draw water. And let it come to pass that the damsel to whom I shall say, Let down thy pitcher, I pray thee, that I may drink, and she shall say, Drink, and I will give thy camels also. Let the same be she that thou hast appointed for thy servant Isaac, and thereby shall I know that thou hast shewed kindness unto my master. Now, a couple of things I want to bring out here. Of course, this is after the servant had already went to the land that Abraham had sent him to pick a wife out for his daughter. That the servant is praying for wisdom in picking out the correct one, the one that God would have for Isaac to be the wife of Isaac. So he's praying for wisdom. And regardless how you're going to go about, regardless what culture you're in, let me encourage you, if you have not picked out your spouse, let me encourage you to pray for God's wisdom in picking out your spouse. Getting hooked up with the wrong spouse can be a miserable experience throughout the course of your life. You want to really seek God's will in picking out that spouse. And that's what this servant prayed. Now, I want you to notice something else too. Yes, he prayed for a sign of knowing which young lady to approach, to contemplate as a wife for Isaac. But it wasn't some kind of wild, strange sign. You know, if you're praying for a sign of who to marry, and you're praying for God to lead you in that direction, don't be given conditions like, well, Lord, if you want me to marry so-and-so, let us win the lottery. Let me get a brand new job. Let me find this brand new house and this, that, and the other. This was pretty much, the sign that he used. It was a very reasonable sign. Notice that he asked the Lord to let this damsel offer to feed or give water to his camels also, which would indicate that this young lady had a servant's heart and was hospitable and kind-hearted and just a very nice person. So it makes perfect sense, the sign that he was asking for. It is kind of like when somebody comes in for a job interview, and I've heard of people doing this. They give the person leading questions to see if they'll do something like badmouth their last couple of former employers, just to see what kind of mental state they're in and how receptive they are to instruction, how much of a grudge holder they are, and that kind of thing. So it was really, on one hand, it was looking for a sign from the Lord, but on the other hand, it had a lot of wisdom in the sign he was asking for. Because when Rebekah did this and offered to give water to his camels, it showed that she was kind-hearted and had a servant's heart and would most likely make a great wife for Isaac. So it made complete, perfect sense. Okay. Now, going on, 15 through 16, and it came to pass before he had done speaking that behold, Rebekah came out, who was born at Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, with her pitcher upon her shoulder. And the damsel was very fair to look upon, a virgin, neither had any man known her, and she went down to the well and filled her pitcher and came up. So we see here that first off, Rebekah came out and she had all of the other qualifications that she needed to have. She was a single woman. She was in the right lineage. And all of that. It wasn't that she was unqualified. She was a qualified candidate. Okay? Now, if you're a young woman and you're praying for a spouse, and you're praying for a spouse, and some man comes along, he's 30 years old, hadn't held down a job his whole entire life, he's an unqualified candidate. And I don't care what kind of fleece you put out, if he's 30 years old and he hadn't held down a job, or he's bad to drink, bad to beat on women and stuff like that, you don't marry him. Okay? You want to be looking for qualified candidates. And for that matter, when you're going to look, when y'all young people, when you're going, and I've been a youth pastor twice, and I've always said this, if you're looking for somebody to marry, don't go out to a bar somewhere to find somebody to marry. Go to church and get you a church person. But anyway, so Rebekah was a qualified candidate. So this qualified candidate comes out. And then 17 through 19, and the servant ran to meet her, and he said, Let me, I pray thee, drink a little water of thy pitcher. And she said, Drink, my lord. And she hasted and let down her pitcher upon her hand and gave him drink. And when she had done giving him drink, she said, I will draw water for thy camels also until they have done drinking. So we see here where she fulfilled the sign that the servant had asked for. We also see the motivation inside of her was to be a nice person, to be a service to the community, to be hospitable, to be kind-hearted. And by the fact that she did this, gave an indication the quality of person that she was. And sometimes you can see and be around people and see them do things, and it gives you a good indication the quality of person that is. I remember years ago, after I shut my company down and went to work for a contracting company, Um, I was at their office. It was pouring down raining. I had just started with that contracting company. And the guy who was the president of that company came in the parking lot. The only two spots that were available was the handicap parking space, and then way out, was an empty parking space out there in the parking lot. But it was a good distance from the front door. And the president of the company did not take the handicap parking space. He left that open, went all the way out, and this was pouring down raining, went all the way out and took the parking space that was available that was not the handicap parking space. And I said to myself then, this is a good place to work, because that man has got character to be the head of that company, and to not take the handicap parking space, to leave that for somebody who really needed it, even though it was just pouring down raining. And you can tell, and it proved true as I stayed there for a while, because I was there for a couple of years, and had seen the man make other decisions and seen the character, his character. It gave a great indication of the character of that man. He was, that's the what kind of person he was. And there are times when, if you notice little things like that, will tell you the character of the person depending on how they do sometimes little small things. And this is one of the things about Rebekah that you can see as the story progresses throughout Isaac and Rebekah's life. You can see how that she had a tender heart and cared about people and cared about things, and how tender-hearted she was. And she made a great wife for Isaac. So this was a great thing for this servant to ask for. You can tell sometimes the character of a young man by how he, when he comes in, how he treats his girlfriend's mama. I mean, if he shows respect for his girlfriend's mama, that's a good sign. How people treat people, whether or not they show respect, whether or not they show kindness and consideration, is a real good indication a lot of times of how they'll conduct themselves over the course of their life. So as you go out and you're dating, those of you that are single, as you're going out dating and that kind of thing, and looking for a mate, notice some of those things. And it's a good, like I said, it's a good indication. How somebody, when they go into a restaurant, whether or not they tip or not, is an indication a lot of times of their character, whether or not they care about people. You get some single mama who's out there being a waitress somewhere, and they come slaving over your food, bring your food to you, and you don't leave them any tip. In some of those places, they don't pay those people hardly anything. Most of the money they get is from their tips. So if you're sitting there and you don't give them a tip, that's an indication of your character. And it's also, too, I've heard of people leaving tracts for people for tips. Don't you dare do that. That's giving the church a bad name when you do that. We're supposed to be tender-hearted and free-hearted and kind-hearted, just like Rebekah right here. That's the way we're supposed to be. So when you're out there When you're out there, especially at those dinners right after church, don't give the church a bad name. Don't be bring shame on the cross by being hard-hearted and stingy. But we see how Rebekah was tender-hearted, and it was a good indication of the character of that woman. And then you see how the course of her life, how that she showed it in other times, how she was tender-hearted to her children and stuff. But anyway, okay. Now 2021, and she hasted and emptied her pitcher into the trough, and ran again into the well to draw water, and drew for all his camels. And the man wondering at her held his peace, to wit whether the Lord had made his journey prosperous or not. Now let me point out something else too, because we're really kind of talking for a lot of young people and stuff today, I guess. Don't jump to conclusions. We see the servant here, even though there were all indications it was heading that way and it was looking good and all like that, he didn't jump up and immediately say, well, yeah, that's it. This is the one. It's going to be the wife. Yep. I mean, just come on, jump on the back of this camel. We're heading back to Isaac. You're married. You're going to get married. He didn't do that. He still held his peace and began to see and wanted to investigate it some more. So don't jump into these things. Okay. Now, jumping down, he worked out the deal with the family, and they gave a little bit of consideration to Rebekah whether or not she wanted to go immediately or wait a little bit. And it all got worked out. It's not the way we do things here in our country, and not the way we do things in our culture, but this is the way they did it in their culture. And God bless that. God blesses the way we do it. You know, it's just a question of culturally how it's to be done. The main thing is praying and seeking the will of God, which they did here, and also we should be doing it too. Okay, 24:61 through 63. And Rebekah arose and her damsels, and they rode upon the camels and followed the man. And the servant took Rebekah and went his way. And Isaac came from the way of the well Lahorah, for he dwelt in the south country. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field at the eventide. And he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming. So we see off in the distance where the prayers were being answered. And oftentimes in our life, we will be in that position. We'll be praying for something, and then off in the distance, we'll see our prayers getting answered and getting closer. You know, I'm reminded of the Old Testament prophet, and how they saw or praying for rain, and I see a hand, cloud the size of a man's hand off in the distance. And it kept getting closer until the rain finally came. And a lot of times, like I said, in our lives, that's what happens. We'll begin to see little evidence of things. My daddy, when he got saved, I'd been praying hard. I just got saved when I was a kid, and been praying hard for him to get saved. And I could tell that the Lord was working on him because he was agitated. He was under conviction. And I could tell, and I knew in my heart that he was on his way of getting saved. And sure enough, he went down there and got saved. And the first thing he said when he came up from the altar was, "Where's Donnie?" And, oh, wow. And it was just, a phenomenal thing. I guess it's, I got a strange situation. I guess I helped win both my dads to the Lord. So anyway, I'm real thankful. But anyway, sometimes you'll see things like that happening where off in the distance, you'll see things begin to change. Okay, now 64 through 67. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she lighted off the camel. And she had said unto the servant, What man is this that walketh in the field to meet us? And the servant had said, It is my master. Therefore she took a veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all things that he had done. And Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Now I want you to point out something here, that regardless what kind of cultural way they picked out their mates and stuff like that, that their marriage was full of love and full of respect and treating each other right and being obedient to each other and looking out after each other. And that's the way our marriages need to be. We need to make these bonds, keep these promises that we've made, these lifelong promises that we've made, and do the best that we can by them. And that's what they did, and that's the reason why they were so blessed. Okay, a couple of real quick concluding thoughts is that be praying for God's will in your life. Seek God's will. Don't try to make any kind of fleece that's just ridiculous, though. Use some common sense, and if you're going to say, well, Lord, if this is your will, let this work out, or whatever, use some common sense in the way that you phrase those. I mean, don't do anything ridiculous like ask the Lord that when you wake up in the morning that the sun is pink, or anything like that. I mean, make it a reasonable indication. Be praying for God's will and pray for God's blessing and be obedient to His will. Well, friends, we'll be back with you next weekend, good Lord willing.